All right, I'll start you off with something really easy. So this is technically the lesson is 2.8, number 5. And here's a typical, really easy question to kind of just ease you into it. -1. Now there's two things that can happen. It can either make the thing crash, or it can make it equal 0, and they are totally different things. -1, does it make it equal 0, or does it make it crash? It makes it equal 0, because on the top, when I put the -1 in there, on the bottom it doesn't do anything. It's no big deal. It's just -4. But on the top it becomes a 0. If it's 0 on the top, the answer is 0. If it's 0 on the bottom, however, like if I had put in 3 like this, then you got big problems. Then it's not just 0, it's 0 on the bottom, which is, what's that called? Undefined. Good. All right, so they're going to ask you things like, tell things that will cause this equation to equal 0. Well, and it'll just be a little more complicated like this. Tell things that would make this equation equal 0. All you got to do is figure out what makes the top 0 to find out what makes it 0. Then it'll say, part B, tell what makes this equation undefined. And then in this case, what's the answer? 7. All right. What's the only other option? Well, they might ask you, what would make this equation positive? As in not the answer that comes out when you're all done. Not what number is it, but just what would make it positive. All right, well, that is a little more complicated. Now we got to start thinking about what are the little zones on the number line. You remember making number lines for these things? All right. Hold on a second, I got to use black. So if I make a number line for this, and then I got to test the regions, well, how do I decide where the regions are? It's because I've already put on the number line the spots that makes it 0 and the spots that make it undefined. All right, so let's do this problem together. This one right here on the board. Everybody make a number line with me. And tell me one important number for sure. 7. So I'm going to put a 7 on here. And remember how I said on this, I don't want you to put a empty filled or a filled in circle on it. I just wanted you to put a letter above it. Is this a U or a Z? This one's a U. It'll make it undefined at 7. But that's one of the important spots in the number line. And then we're going to test the regions around 7. But there's a couple other important spots. What would make that part equal 0? Very good. That was quick. 3/2. Now, if you're not that good at that, what you can do is set 2x minus 3 equal to 0 and just solve that. Set it equal to 0. And 2x equals 3. And then x equals 3/2. All right. And if you can do it in your head, that's okay too. All right. So 3/2 is like 1.5. So I'm going to put her here. Once again, don't put an empty or a filled in circle. Put a letter. This a U or a Z? This one's a Z. It makes the top 0, so it's a Z. And then the 4. 4 is obviously the one that would make this 0. So 4 goes in somewhere in here. It doesn't really even matter too much exactly where it is, but there's a 4 there, and it's also a Z. And now the places where it's positive or the places where it's negative are all of these little zones. Like in there is one of the zones. And is it going to come out positive or negative in that zone? Well, we just pick any number in there. My favorite number's in there. 0. I'm going to test 0. Put in a 0 here. Put in a 0 here. And I think one mistake people make on this is they like try to figure out exactly what the answer is. You don't care. All you care is, does it come out positive or negative? On the top, this part right here, when I put in a 0, do you get that that comes out to 2 minus 3 is -3? And therefore it's negative? This part's neg. This part, when I put in a 0, comes out neg. This part, when I put in a 0, comes out neg. So it's neg over neg. And what's that? Negative. So this whole zone right there comes out negative. Now remember how I would have a smiley face or a frowny face based on the equation? Well, this doesn't have an equation. This doesn't say, like, greater than 0. Okay, if it did, then I'd have to decide, does it work or not? Well, if it's negative, it's not greater than 0, so it wouldn't work. You know, we do one of those deals. But this problem, the way they have it at the beginning of the worksheet, doesn't have one of those. All you have to do is tell where it's negative and where it's positive. So it would be negative from -infinity until 3/2. I would bet this is positive, but you cannot count on that. People do that on the test all the time. They assume that it has to go every other one, and it doesn't. So I should test it. It's between 1.5 and 4, something nice, and 2, or even 3, or whatever. 2 is probably nicer, so I'll go with 2. I'm going to wipe this off quick and get a 2 to put in there. 2 goes in here, 2 goes in here, 2 goes in here, and this becomes neg on the bottom, neg here, and how about that part? Pos. Pos neg over neg, what's the answer? Positive. It is positive in this zone. It was negative in that zone. Get the idea? Just like that, you're back in it, and that's what we've been doing. That's typical questions that you have to be able to handle. Okay? Now, remember, if they throw in absolute values or square roots, it can get a little more complicated. So I think at this point, I'm going to actually hand this worksheet out to you and do some of the problems from your tonight's homework. And there's enough on there that I can do a few, and you'll still have plenty left. All right, so let's just jump right into the homework. I think you'll be okay. Thankfully, we didn't end on incredibly hard stuff that we have to now test on. I think it's on the easier side. The one place I see kids screw up all the time is testing your intervals, though. Be very careful as you test your intervals. Everybody gets the zeros and the u's right, but they test the intervals wrong. So be careful. Some of you know if you've got the not careful gene. I hate to say it, but I have it. I've taken these ACT practice tests, and I'll know how to do every single problem on the test, but I'm rushing so much to try to get through it that I'll make 5, 6 mistakes. I'm like, ugh! But if you're one of those people, you just have to know, okay, I got to double check myself. Does yours say 2.8 number 5 on top? All right, good. All right. Number 1's a little too easy. I think we don't need to work on number 1 too long because I already started it with you, or one like it. Number 2. Do number 2 with me. X times root x plus 3. All right, this one's a little different because it doesn't have a denominator. Can you still do something to it to make it crash? Yes. You could put negatives underneath that square root such that it'll crash, right? So, all right, so the questions are A, what will make it equal 0? For part A, just what would make this equal 0? If x was equal to -3, that would make it equal 0. It doesn't crash it, it makes it 0. Square root of 0 is 0. Okay. What's the other thing that would make it 0? X equals 0. Don't forget about that one. If you put a 0 right there, the whole thing crashes. Not crashes, sorry. The whole thing becomes 0. Okay, so part A was those. Part B is what would make it undefined. Well, what's the key moment? 3. No, -3. When you put in -3, you get really close to crashing this, but you don't quite crash it, right? So then is it things that will crash it, are they things that are bigger than -3 or less than -3? Less than -3. Things that are less than -3 would make it crash. All right. Then the next part is, where would it be positive? Where would it be positive? Well, at this point, I would probably make a little number line, because I already got my important points for the number line, 0 and -3. So here's a -3, here's a 0, and they're both zeros. And now I can just test the little regions. I'm going to test 1. Seems like a good number to test. I put in 1. It's positive and positive. So it's going to be pos. If I put in -1, it's going to be negative. This part's positive. Negative times a positive makes a negative. And then I bet if I put in a -4, it's even more impressive. It's not positive and it's not negative. If I put in -4, yes, that part's negative, but it's a negative underneath the square root, so I can't put a plus or a minus here. The whole area is a U. The whole area is undefined. All right, so what area would make it positive? That's for part C, right? Positive. What makes it positive is in this area, which I'd say from what? 0 to infinity is correct. Very good. Does it actually at 0? Does it make it positive? No. So I should use a parenthesis here because 0 does not work in that it does not make it positive. All right, and then part D is what makes it negative, and that was the zone between -3 and 0. And again, -3 and 0 don't actually themselves make it negative, so they don't work. There we go. Let's move on to a different kind of problem. Let's look at like number 3. Why don't we start with just 3? 3 is relatively easy because there's no denominator. It takes away a lot of the undefined stuff. And then it's got x squared minus 3x plus 2. Have you heard me say this before? If you can factor it, you should. That was true also on all those ACT practice tests I was taking. If you can factor it, you should, because a lot of times then things cancel and stuff. I bet this will factor. -2 and -1, right? So now I got 3 important points. I can put them on a number line. Yep, I know where you got to go. Go ahead. Have a good day. And I'm going to put in -1 and 1 and 2. And then those, are they zeros or are they going to crash it? They're zeros. They're all z's. None of them will crash it because I don't even have a denominator to crash. The only thing is look for square roots. There's no square root to crash either, so can't crash this thing. All right, now I got to test the zones. I'm going to test my favorite thing, which is 0. It's right in here. I'm going to test 0. I put in a 0 and a 0 and a 0. Then I get positive, negative, negative. Positive, negative, negative. Some teachers write that like this and just put a little thing in there, and I can do that too. And then this becomes positive. But then I should say smiley or not smiley? It's positive. Does that make it less than 0? No, so it does not work. So positives are, in this case, frownies. You do not want to confuse positive with means works. Just because it's positive doesn't mean it works. It's positive means, in this case, that it's not less than 0, so it's not working. All right. That's good help for starting, and all you got to do is test the rest of the intervals. Let me help you with one more that's a little tricky. Let's look at number 6. Everybody look at number 6 with me, please. Okay, on number 6, it's got something squared. Right away, that tells me something. Do you get that something squared like that? Yes, I could break it into 2 things, but this is a different thought. Do you get that whenever I square it, that it cannot come out negative? This whole term is always going to be a pos, no matter what you put in there, because you're going to square it, and it's going to become positive. Okay, so when you're testing your intervals, that's a really nice thing to see. Now, the other thing is, it's got an absolute value after that. X plus 3. Can that ever come out negative? No, that's always going to be positive too. So it's positive and positive, always. So when is that going to be less than or equal to 0? Well, it'll never be less than, but could it be equal to 0? Yes. So the only place this will work is if you ever get it to equal 0, because it'll never be less than 0. So we're really just not looking for that anymore. We're just looking for the equal part. So where is that equal to 0? Well, I just got to figure out what would make it 0. What can I put in there that makes it 0? -3 is one of the spots that makes it 0. And can anybody do that in their head? 1/2. And if you're not good at that, you go 2x minus 1 equals 0, 2x equals 1, x equals 1/2. Okay? So what do you write? Well, what am I supposed to do? What do the directions say? Solve. So I'm trying to figure out where it works. So like normally we'd say answers like from 0 to infinity. In this case, there's only 2 things that makes this equal 0. So I can make a big number line and put these 2 things on it. 1/2 and -3. I should put them in the other order though. -3 and 1/2. Those are the only 2 things that work. So should I put them in a parenthesis or a bracket or what? Well, remember, it doesn't work here, doesn't work here, doesn't work here, because those areas are all positives. which doesn't mean it works. It means that it's not going to come out less than 0 ever. But these spots right here are my two things that work. So I would say -3, and I'd put brackets around it, and 1/2, and again, I'd put brackets around it. Now, if you forgot to put brackets around it, I might still be able to take it, but what you would not want to do is write your answer like this, because that looks like you're saying it only works at the point -3, 1/2. You want to be clear about what your answer is. Your answer is two things, -3 and 1/2. So the way I wrote it is the best way. Any other way than that, you risk getting it marked wrong, but I'm just saying, I don't want to show you all the ways that could be right and all the ways it could be wrong. That's the way I want you to do it. Try to remember that. And how far off you are from that will be like whether or not I'd mark it wrong. Okay, let's go to the back side and do one off the back. Everybody look at number 12. That looks different. Number 12 says x cubed is greater than or equal to 2x squared plus 8. Who's got a smart idea on how to start? Move the stuff over and then, I forgot an x, and then factor it. So I'm going to move this junk to this side, because I don't like having a negative in the front of the whole thing, or I have to factor out a negative, which is kind of a pain. So I'm going to say this is x cubed minus 2x squared minus 8x is greater than or equal to 0. Get how I moved everything over, and now I got a 0 on that one side? Okay, now I'm going to factor the x out. If you can factor it, you should. And can you factor it again? I bet you probably can. Something that multiplies to 8 and adds to 2. 4 and 2 if you do the negatives right. Very good. So we got x and 4 and 2, and one's got to be negative and one's got to be positive. That's negative, that's positive. Cool. There, I got it all factored out. Now what? Now you make the number line. Find your important points. Figure out if any of those points would crash it. None of them would crash it. So none of them are undefined. Your important points are 0, 4, and -2. And I'm going to put those all on a number line, and I'm going to test the regions around it. Wait, -2 is down here. And 0 and 4. And then I'm going to check, like, are these spots zeros or undefined? They're all zeros. And then I'm going to pick a spot like 1. I'm going to test 1. 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. And that becomes pos, neg, pos. And a positive, negative, positive would come out negative. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work. And I check this. Is a negative going to be bigger than or equal to 0? No, it will not. This area does not work. All right. Got you started on several of your problems. I think you got the idea. As long as there's not too much rust on your brain, you should be able to be all right on this. Feel free to come up and ask me for help. Tomorrow we'll review a lot of topics, but we have tomorrow and the next day to review. Then tests on Monday. Okay? All right, that's all I got for you for today.